Want more Gators Breakdown? Join Gators Breakdown Plus. Starting at $3 a month, get access to unique episodes, plus a blog, chat room, giveaways, shout-outs, and more. Gators Breakdown Plus is furthering the interaction with fans and listeners like you. Head to gatorsbreakdown.supportingcast.fm to join Gators Breakdown Plus today. Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Hey, look, I know we got to do it. We got to take a break from recruiting. There's real football coming up. I promise. So we get these summer months, counting down. We're counting the weeks down. I think about 7 weeks to the Gators take the field versus Utah. So to break it all down, part 2 of these preseason magazines. Co-host Will Miles joins me right here on Gators Breakdown. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles SEC and his site Read and Reaction. Will, we broke it down last week for the first time. Of course, I should have known better. We weren't going to get it all into an hour. So part 2 of our preseason magazine look here, and we'll go more of a deep dive into the team itself, unit rankings, where each unit ranks for Florida as far as each position group goes: quarterback, running back, receivers, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, secondary, and then we'll wrap it up with a little bit of a all SEC and All-American look. And the Gators do have one All-American from Lindy's in offensive lineman Osiris Torrence. And we'll have a feature about him before we get off here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. But, Will, hard to believe, man. About seven weeks. And all this stuff that we're talking about these last couple of weeks. And the next coming 7 weeks, we'll break it all down, get everybody prepared for the season. And we usually start it right here with these preseason magazines.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm bringing Max down, my 7-year-old, for the game. So I'll bring a cooler full of sodas to the Harmonic Woods tailgate so he can participate in the festivities or something like that. And, people have to behave themselves while he's there. But, look, this is why we care, right? I mean, we sit here and argue about recruiting and argue about rosters and is this quarterback good enough and is this coach good enough, and there's all the talking season stuff. But the reason you care about the talking season stuff is because of what's happened in September 3rd, right? And so that's that's obviously what we're building up towards. And it's hard to believe it's already July 12th, so I'm excited about it. These preseason magazines over the summer are always sort of the bellwether that it's coming, and it's not going to be too long. We'll get back. People are going to get back from their vacation. It's going to be kickoff time. It's going to be exciting.
Absolutely. So one more time, if you want a Gator-focused preseason magazine, readreaction.com/mag. Get it there. From good work there from Will and Nick. Just a deep, deep dive into Florida right there from Will and Nick. readreaction.com/mag. And hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. That'll help us out right here on this YouTube version of Gators Breakdown. Thank you for joining us live, all of you watching us live right now. And check us out at the home of Gators Breakdown, news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. If you want to take a look back at the recent Jacksonville area recruits, that's where you can do so. And lots of good stuff going on there locally with recruiting. So, all right, well, let's get into it. First, let's take a look back right quick last week before we get in here. Athlon, their preview, this kind of predicted order of finish. The Gators picked 4th behind Georgia, Tennessee, and Kentucky right there from Athlon. Have Georgia winning the East, Alabama winning the West. No surprise right there. Lindy's pretty much the same. Florida 4th, but they flip-flop Tennessee and Kentucky. Lindy's has Kentucky 2nd, Tennessee 3rd. But no surprise, once again, Georgia, Alabama winning their divisions and going on to the SEC championship. So, they did show they expect Florida to be improved. And look, it's hard not to be improved from what Florida showed last year. Pretty much the arrow can only go up, hopefully, in our eyes there. And so Florida will be improved, and the kind of what they showed was, Florida Tennessee, Kentucky, probably same conference record. It's just that Florida, I think they were handing Florida that Utah loss, and that was going to be the difference maker there. But they all had Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida 4-4 in the SEC. So we fast forward, deep dive more into it now as we look at the talent and what they think about the talent. And I'm surprised they maybe like Florida as much as they do compared to Tennessee and Kentucky when you start looking at how they view the talent on the roster. And here you go. We'll start with the unit rankings, and Will, it is not pretty. Right here, throwing up what we are seeing from both of these publications. We'll start with Athlon here. 8th ranked at the quarterback position. So, there's not a lot of explanation of how they come to this. Of course, I'm pretty sure they're weighting the whole depth chart, not just Anthony Richardson, but Anthony Richardson and Jack Miller and Jalen Kitna and Max Brown. 8th best right there. Lindy's a little bit better. Likes the quarterback position better at with the 6th best ranking for quarterbacks as far as unit ranking goes. Will surprised a bit when we start there at quarterback to see Florida as low as 8th right there by Athlon.
Yeah, I think that's sort of punting it down the road based on, people expecting, no one knows what to expect from Richardson. We saw a lot last year that was good. We saw some stuff last year that was bad. I think the interesting thing is, so Bill Simmons always does this interesting thing with the NBA where he looks at the trade value. And the question that he asks when he lists basically the top 60 guys in the NBA has to do with contracts and things like that.
Yeah.
But basically he says, would you trade this guy for this guy straight up? Right. So like Giannis, would you trade him for Steph Curry? Right. And so since you would, because Giannis is younger than Curry, then Giannis is in front of him. You do that exercise with Anthony Richardson with just about every program in the SEC. And I don't think he gets picked 8th. Right. I think if you go on the playground with these 14 teams and say you got to draft, you get to draft the starting quarterbacks. Who are you going to draft, first? Who's going to come off the line first? I don't think Richardson is the eighth guy picked. I also don't think Miller takes too long to snake around. In fact, a team like Vanderbilt would probably take Miller as their starter. So I'm a little bit surprised at that 8th. I think that's probably we're penalizing you for your wide receivers a little bit at the quarterback position, and that we're not sure that Napier's going to allow you to air it out the same way Dan Mullen would have. So I think that's the penalty, because, again, if I was on the playground and you brought all the SEC quarterbacks in, I mean, look, guy like Bryce Young, deserves to be up there ahead of him. Guy like Hendon Hooker for this year probably deserves to be in front of him. But a guy like, Spencer Rattler, I mean, was he all that much better than Anthony Richardson last year in his limited time at Oklahoma? Obviously, Oklahoma had national championship aspirations, but he had a national championship type roster around him too, and struggled and got beat out by Caleb Williams. So I don't know. I'd have to see the rest of the list to really look at it. But I mean, Will Levis, no. Zach Calzada, no. Max Johnson, no.
So Athlon makes it a little more difficult in trying to chase this down, but they do have Alabama number 1, so no surprise. Number 2 would be Tennessee, Hendon Hooker. 3, Arkansas. So,
okay. I guess based on last year's performance, I can see that.
Okay, yeah, exactly. 4th, Mississippi State. So you got the Mike Leach.
That's awful.
See, that's what I'm saying. How do you
that's
win
just
Mississippi
awful.
State? Don't get me wrong. I know you can't penalize too much because of system, but who is it? Rogers there. So
you have to penalize because of system. Every single player in his system throws 70% completions, throws for 4 yards an attempt, and then just gets slaughtered whenever they play anybody good, because they just basically sit back, play a zone, wait for you to make a mistake, and then beat you. So Will Rogers averaged 6.9 yards per attempt last year, 683 attempts, 4,739 yards, 74% completion. I mean, it's a running game. 147 QB rating last year. That's like middle of the pack. Anthony Richardson had a QB rating right around there and played like 65 snaps. I think Anthony Richardson, well, he did have 36 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. So I was about to say Richardson might have scored more, but that's not true. Look, he was a sophomore, and he improved from 123 QB rating as a freshman to 147. he's going to top out around 150. Like his QB rating is going to sit there around 150. None of Leach's quarterbacks, except for the guy who wound up playing for the Jaguars with the mustache. Can't remember his name.
Oh, Gardner Minshew.
Gardner Minshew. None of these guys for Leach's teams have really been all that successful when they go to the pros. And the reason is that they don't throw the ball down the field. 6.9 yards per attempt doesn't get the job done in the SEC. I don't care who you are. That's a bad pick.
So that was Mississippi State at 4. So they did have South Carolina. There you go. Rattler at 5.
All right, that's a projection. But if you're going to project Rattler, why wouldn't you project Richardson?
There you go. Georgia at 6. Stetson Bennett, national championship winning quarterback, and the depth chart, 4-star, 5 stars there. So, but here's the thing, if you start factoring in depth chart, wouldn't you have Georgia a little higher? But
well, and if you factor in depth chart, wouldn't you have anybody in front of Mississippi State?
Yeah.
Like who's behind Rodgers? He threw 683 passes last year. There's nobody else on the depth chart that we know anything about there.
So they do have Kentucky 7. Will Levis is getting a lot of draft love.
God,
no. Him at 7. Florida 8. There we go. So, but that is kind of interesting that you see Will Levis and Anthony Richardson both get a lot of draft love. But as far, like I said, they've got to be taking depth chart into consideration. With
Will Levis as a junior, 8 yards per attempt, 24 touchdowns, 13 picks, 148.7. That's an improvement. And he only threw 102 passes at Penn State, but he did improve his QB rating by 30 points. But 141.7 with a 66% completion is right about, he's going to have to improve his yards per attempt to 10 to be a top 10 draft pick. The last guy to do anything like that was Burrow, and Burrow had a lot more talent around him and a lot more talent to begin with. And
no Wan'Dale Robinson. I don't know how in the world that keeps getting overlooked, but it does.
And they lost 2 offensive linemen too. Their center and I think it was their left guard or their left tackle both got drafted in the NFL. One of them went like the 2nd round. And you got Rodriguez, who's going to be out the first couple of games because he's dealing with a DUI or something like that.
Yeah, we'll see.
So, we'll see. But my point is that you look at. So here's the thing I don't get. Anthony Richardson, you look at him. 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Usually you sit there and go, oh, he's going to have an awful QB rating. 144.1 because he averaged 8.3 yards per attempt with a 59% completion percentage. So there's a ton of room to improve for a guy who was getting yanked in and yanked out of the starting lineup. But look, there's a lot of stuff coming up in this ranking where I'm going to say, yeah, I agree. Or actually, I think they might have the talent overrated. This is one place where I get a little bit fired up because he also ran for 401 yards, a 7.9 yard per rush average when they gave him the ball on the ground. So he's averaging as much on the ground as he is through the air. He's averaging more on the ground than Will Rogers is averaging through the air. And it's by like a yard and a half. So I get it. He didn't have a lot of playing time last year. Maybe you say, well, he's an injury risk because he got injured a couple of times last year, but you got Miller behind him to step in for a game or two. And the upside of Richardson is so significant that that's my big gripe with Rodgers. It's not that he's not a competent quarterback. It's not that he might even be a good quarterback. It's that his ceiling is what it is. Same thing with Stetson Bennett. His ceiling is what it is. Spencer Rattler, I can understand because there you're projecting a guy who was a five-star candidate, played very well his freshman year, kind of fell out of favor. Lincoln Riley ends up bailing, so he figure he probably had a foot out the door the whole season. Did that impact Rattler at all? Now he's at South Carolina. Is he going to play better? Maybe. But again, you talked about Robinson at Kentucky. Who are the weapons at South Carolina for Rattler?
I was about to say, I mean, he doesn't have those Oklahoma receivers anymore.
Yeah, it sort of makes a difference when your guy's running 10 yards behind the defensive back for Kansas. Look, if you put Vanderbilt and Kansas on a neutral field, I think Vanderbilt beats them by about 50.
Kansas did good for that. They showed some life last year.
Kansas sucks.
But I know. I mean, put Vanderbilt in the Big 12, and they look like Kansas did. So they would have showed improvement at the same time. So
7-5, man. They go 7-5 in the Big
12. So let's go back to it because there is some improvement there from Lindy's. Yeah, there we go. Lindy's had them 6th. The Gators 6th. So top 3, I think, are about the same. Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas. They have Kentucky 4. So Will Levis getting a whole lot of love there from Lindy's. Mississippi State 5 there, of course. Then again with Will Rogers, and Florida 6th there for when you look at quarterbacks. So Lindy's a little more positive on the Gator quarterback situation than Athlon. But Will, here we go. Number 11 for both. They think the Florida running back room is the 11th best in the SEC. And look, this was before Bowman transferred. So if you probably let them re-rank it, they may penalize Florida even more. This one definitely has to be just because what have you seen at the SEC level besides Naquan Wright? That's all Florida has as far as SEC games go, and a running back that's in that room that has shown any life, limited behind Dameon Pierce, limited behind Malik Davis. He has shown some flashes. I think there's some reason to be excited about Naquan Wright. But Lorenzo Lingard, very, very, very limited carries his career so far at Florida. Montreal Johnson, all Sun Belt. Will that transfer to the SEC? I happen to think it will, but I can see where Athlon and Lindy's just like, okay, show me first. Now, they threw DeMarcus Bowman in this, former 5-star. I thought probably would have gotten a little bit more love than higher than 11th in the run game. You add ETN as well as a true freshman who could come in, may get some carries now with Bowman gone. But, well, I get it because there's just not a lot there to go back and lean on, but I have a feeling this one's going to be probably top 5 or at least top half of the league when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, I think so because of what Napier's going to try to do. At the same time, this is one where I think projection becomes easier, or it's not quite as obvious. Like we saw Anthony Richardson and we saw him be explosive last year. And so the question is, can he be consistent and can he do the other things that the quarterback position requires? At the running back position, Lorenzo Lingard had 1 catch for 9 yards, 11 carries for 43 yards. So 3.9 yards per rush. Naquan Wright in his career has averaged 4 yards per attempt. Now Wright's been pretty good through the air, 14 for 179 last year, but you got to replace Malik Davis, 23 for 217, and Dameon Pierce, 19 for 216 through the air, and the 5.7 yards per rush and 5.3 yards per rush from Pierce and Davis over about 192 carries between the two of them. So you got to replace, your top 2 running backs. Naquan Wright, I think everybody realizes, is essentially a third down back. Bowman leaves. Now you got Lingard, and then you've got Montreal Johnson. Johnson, pretty good, right? I mean, 162 carries for 838 yards as a freshman, 5.2 yards per rush, only 6 receptions for 53 yards. So again, I think if you look at that room, you go, look, Wright's going to be on there in third down. You don't really know what you're going to get from Lingard. Even if Johnson replicates what he did at Louisiana, he's not really a 3-down back. So, look, I get why people would look at it and say that room is a little bit of an unknown. At the same time, the talent level in that room is pretty high. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those things where, I mean, again, I look at the SEC and go, well, they're going to have better running backs than Vanderbilt. They're going to have better running backs than Mississippi State. They should have better running backs than you would expect Ole Miss. LSU traditionally runs pretty well.
I was about to tell you, that was a little bit of a surprise. Lindy's LSU 12th and LSU 11th in Athlon. I get it because their running game hasn't been there either, except when you play Todd Grantham. But they've struggled. Traditionally, besides go back to Burrow and Edwards-Helaire, they didn't run the ball, of course, like they did before that, but still a very effective run game. But they have not been the same run game that you expect to see back when Leonard Fournette's carrying the ball.
Yeah, we'll talk when we get to the offensive line, and that's one of the reasons I'm a little bit bullish on the running backs. But look, I don't have a problem with this one just because I understand where they're coming from. There's a lot that they're replacing, and there's not a lot of experience there. I mean, you're really looking and saying Montreal Johnson either has to be the guy or Lorenzo Lingard has to stay healthy. And Lingard wasn't able to win the job over Pierce and Davis. Now, maybe that had to do with the coaching staff and not Lingard. But then when he had an opportunity to sort of go out there in the spring game and show something, he pulls something the first time he makes a cut and hasn't shown us anything. So it's hard to project. I get it. It's hard to project. And the fact that he won the job, I think then reflects to people looking at Montreal Johnson saying, okay, if Johnson had won the job, maybe you'd say, hey, we know exactly what we're going to get. But with Lingard kind of winning the job, or at least it seems like he did coming out of the spring, we don't know anything about that yet. And so, it's hard to project.
All right, so let's get back to it right here. And probably no surprise, wide receiver not very high up there for the Gators either. Athlon thinks better for the Gators at number 9. Lindy's at number 10. Will, just at the bottom half of these offensive rankings here for the Gators. And of course, this does not factor in Ricky Pearsall transfer from Arizona State. These magazines were put in publication, all that stuff, but before that. So I'd say you probably bump Florida up at least. I would think they would maybe bump Florida up at least one spot for that. But, not really sure. They got Florida at 10. I mean, Texas A&M's number 9, traditionally putting in pretty good receivers there. So that would be on the Lindy side. So, you look at it and, yeah, they have Texas Athlon. And it has Texas A&M 10, so right around that same area. So not a lot of love for the Texas A&M receivers. Florida 8 there, and Kentucky at 7. So I did mess that up a little bit. Now I'm going back and looking at it. Let me see. Hold on. No, I was right. It was nice. It was nice there for Athlon. So yeah, not a lot of love there. I mean, Justin Shorter is going to be the number 1. Well, I'm not sure he strikes fear in anybody in the SEC. I'm hoping, that 5-star breaks out with some better quarterback play this year. Xavier Henderson, I think we're still waiting on the breakout from him as well. I mean, there was a reason Florida had to go get Ricky Pearsall through the transfer portal, just because, look, there was not a lot there to feel confident about. Now I feel better that if quarterback play is better, that we'll see some better wide receiver play. But this is one where I can't argue a 9th, 10th ranking right now. Hopefully Anthony Richardson helps those guys come along. But, I just there's just still a lot of unproven there. We talked about it in the spring there when we went through the spring roster. There's just not a lot to feel confident there. And there may not be that one guy, just probably going to be that group effort at this position.
Where would you have ranked Florida's wide receivers at the end of last year?
Probably same, if not worse.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at Pearsall, his stats are very similar to what Jacob Copeland had. Copeland had 41 for 642. Yep. You figure he steps in and replaces that. Then you got Rick Wells, who's out, but then you got Shorter, then Henderson, Whittemore, Zipper, Weston, Frazier's, and Burke as your wide receivers. So really, at this point, it's the exact same wide receiver. If you think that Pearsall can step in and replace the production of Copeland, then it's almost the exact same receiving crew that we had last year. Yeah. Now, when Anthony Richardson was in there, it looked like an all-world receiving crew. When Emory Jones was in there were times where they beat guys and just weren't able to take advantage of it. And now there might have been times where they couldn't get separation either. That was a big discussion during the LSU game in the first half, as Blackledge kept talking about how Florida's wide receivers couldn't get any separation. Turns out when the better quarterback came in, all of a sudden they were getting separation. So the question then is, why is that? And is that something that'll turn around? I think the big problem with Florida's wide receiver room has less to do with the top end, has something to do with the top end talent. There's no Percy Harvin here, but it has less to do with that and more to do with the depth. Like if you look at it, if you've got Pearsall, Shorter, Henderson, and Whittemore on the field, there's nobody else with any real experience. Right. You can't go 5 wide, right? There is no 5th guy to put out there right now if you want to go 5 wide. And then you figure Kamori Gamble caught 31 balls last year. Now he's at UCF. Keon Zipper only catches 11. You've got a couple of guys who are unproven in Elksness, coming in, but, injured during the offseason. And, what exactly are you going to have there? So I know you don't have tight ends in the rating, but I'm assuming
they put it together.
From a catching perspective, that's the other thing, right? Is there's going to be a tight end heavy offense in Gainesville. At least that's what we've been promised. And there's not a lot of tight ends on that roster either. So again, it's sort of, I get it. Right. I don't have a huge problem with this, but I think it is interesting that if you liked the wide receivers last year, or if you look at what they did against LSU, like that is the possibility for what this team will be with Pearsall, because you can kind of slide Pearsall in for Copeland. He's a little bit more of an inside receiver than Copeland was. I mean, Copeland was pretty exclusive there on the outside, but from a production standpoint, you would expect him and Shorter to be able to be sort of the 2 big targets. And then the question is, who else is going to step up?
Absolutely. All right, keep going here. And the offensive line, this is the one I'm going to be a little bullish on. I think there's enough experience to have him better than 8th in the SEC. I think once you factor in what Billy Napier likes to do, his history of development at that position group, I just think, what Florida brings back, adding Osiris Torrence, who we'll talk more about later in this episode, But this is one where I'll be a little bullish on. I'd probably at least now there is a prove it to me as well. After the first month of the season last year, there was a clear drop off. After Alabama, after Tennessee, there was a drop off. Now some of that had to do with play calling. Some of that had to do with not playing the right running back. So the offensive line probably would have looked a little bit better. There were some injuries that factored in as well. But I do think with Garage and White and Eggleston and Torrence and probably Tarquin there at right tackle, 2 more pieces behind that, I do think there's a good, 6, 7 pieces there for this Florida offensive line. I feel a little bit better than 8th, Will. This is one I do think by the end of the year, just because of who they have added, Billy Napier style, this one's probably going to be a little higher for me.
I mean, I don't get it. They averaged 5.4 yards per rush last year. That was 6th against FBS opponents in the country. And they've got Garage coming back. They've got Eggleston coming back. They've got Ethan White coming back. They have upgraded at right guard from Stuart Reese to Osiris Torrance. And I think they've upgraded at right tackle from Gene DeLance to whoever they're going to have in there at that position, whether it's Braun or Tarquin. And so when you look at it, the only reason they ended up 6th is because Ethan White went out. I think it was after the Georgia game, and the running game kind of fell apart at that point. Now, some of that was confidence in the offense. Some of that was Emory Jones not necessarily making the right reads when they were running read options and things were open. Part of it is I think Ethan White has an opportunity to be an all-SEC offensive lineman this year. I think 4th is where they should probably be here. This is the place, when I look at those running backs, I struggle to argue with them having them 11th just because of the experience. But I think they're going to end up higher than that. But I think they may ride the offensive line. This offensive line dominated Alabama's defensive line in the second half last year. Now, Alabama's defensive line wasn't all-world Alabama defensive line last year, but they were a good unit. And Florida dominated them.
Nobody else ran on them like that.
No, Florida dominated them. And so I look at it and I go, when these guys are healthy, they have the ability to do it. Now, again, I think you can look at it and say, if you're looking at offensive linemen and saying, what do you have 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th down the depth chart? They don't have another 5 guys to roll in there, at least not yet. Correct. And that's going to be a big part of what Napier and Sale and all those guys are going to have, and Stapleton are going to have to build. But, I mean, who does? Right? Does Kentucky? I mean, I know Kentucky's ranked ahead, but that's reputation. I mean, like I said, lost 2 guys to the NFL off their starting offensive.
Surprise of it. Kentucky is not 10th in Lindy's, which caught me by surprise as well. And they have, let's see, I cannot see from, man, there's a huge gap there. Yeah, Lindy's has Kentucky 10th. As far as offensive linemen go, and Athlon has them 4th. So a big disparity there between the two.
Yeah, look, I think Florida's offensive line is underrated. I think we're going to find that out this year. I think their offensive line was the strength of the team last year, and when White got hurt, and Reese and DeLance were exposed a little bit. I think DeLance got nicked up too. I know Reese got nicked up as well. Once everybody got nicked up, then things started to go downhill. But they were still the number 1 ranked rushing offense until that South Carolina debacle and maybe the Georgia game because they got shut down there. But, the Georgia and South Carolina games dropped them from 1st to 6th overall in the year. But the 6th, I mean, that was ahead of Kentucky. That was ahead of Oklahoma. That was ahead of Texas, ahead of Cincinnati, ahead of Michigan, ahead of Georgia. Now you can quibble with the heck, Georgia was 19th. You can quibble with the fact that Florida struggled on offense, but that was because of the passing game. The passing game was sort of the running game was great. And now part of that was Emory Jones, but that's not going to go away with Anthony Richardson unless they just want to protect him. And if they're protecting him, that'll be because he's able to throw the ball. So, I think the offensive line way underrated.
All right, let's keep it going here, and let's get back now and shift it to the defensive side. And Will, no surprise here, we have talked ad nauseum about what Florida lacks at defensive line. Both of these publications back that up as well. Athlon has the defensive line 10th, Lindy's at 9th. Besides Jervon Dexter, there's not much proven up there. Now, I'm going to assume because both of these publications really like Brenton Cox, so they're probably listing him as that outside linebacker rush. So probably takes away from what you get with the defensive line here too. But at defensive tackle, we know the issues there. It's Jervon Dexter and a bunch of unproven players, and then some young guys that need to prove themselves at defensive end. Hopefully, I put it in your read and reaction preview, and on the Reddit. Ask Me Anything the other day. They asked me for a breakout player. I put Tyreek Sapp there. So I do think there are some young pieces there I think Florida can work with, but this is one where, rightfully so, there's so much unproven. You cannot argue with 9th and 10th for this defensive line group.
Yeah, this might be too high. I mean, honestly, it might be like. I mean,
it's got to be Dexter that's raising them up from the 12th, 13th range, because I'd be absolutely terrified if Florida lost him, especially if he, forbid, goes down like in preseason camp and you got Kentucky and Utah coming up. I mean, I'd be terrified of where Florida would be at.
Yeah, well, Utah was one of those teams that ranked ahead of Florida in their ability to run the ball. so that's not great. I think, look, it's Dexter and a bunch of unproven guys. And last year they had to bring in a bunch of transfers. 2 years or 3 years ago, they had to bring a bunch of transfers. They hit with Adam Schuler, right? And then Kyrie Campbell was able to step in. So even though they missed on Tadarill Slayton a little bit, and even though Elijah Conliff didn't necessarily turn out, at the same time, you can't live on transfers alone. And this year they haven't even tried to patch it with transfers at this point. And so it's going to be do or die with the guys that they've got. And you're going to have guys like Chris McClellan who are going to get an awful lot of snaps. And look, true freshmen in the defensive line, especially the interior defensive line on the, in the SEC, that doesn't turn out real well most of the time. So I think Florida's going to struggle here. I think it's pretty clear. And I mean, if you look back at the LSU game specifically, but really sort of the issues they were having on the counter, like that's all tied into not being able to win at the point of attack. And Cox is part of that. Obviously, Dexter's part of that. But part of that is just, these guys couldn't beat out Valentino and Newkirk and Truesdell. And in fact, they bring in Truesdell like a week before the season starts, right? It's like, what does that say about the guys who are on the roster? And so, again, maybe that's the staff. Maybe there's can be some improvements there. But the idea that you're going to take this group and improve it significantly, just in a couple of months, probably a little bit of fool's gold. I think Florida's still going to struggle against the run this year. Will they be better schematically? Maybe. And that might be one of the things why the defensive line would be at 10th, as you figure how much worse could it be?
Yeah.
But, the problem is when you play a team like Georgia or you play a team like Alabama or A&M, you might find out how bad it can be.
All right, so there's defensive line. So turning it around, and maybe not a surprise, because when we looked at the roster earlier this year and how it has been recruited over the years, the linebacker position is the best recruited position on the field for the Gators, and it shows in the rankings here. Lindy's all the way up to has Florida all the way up to third as the third best linebacker core in the SEC, fifth for Athlon. So definitely if you combine it, Florida's highest position group overall. So Lindy's did have this to say about Florida's linebacker core. New Florida coach Billy Napier will rely on 2 veteran linebackers to rejuvenate a defense that ranked 73rd nationally last season, allowing 26.8 points per game. The previous season, Ventrell Miller had 88 tackles to lead the Gators before injuries held him to 2 games in 2021. Brenton Cox Jr. has shown he can be so productive. He had 12.5 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks, including 4 against rival Florida State. So Brenton Cox getting some love there. Ventrell Miller back for the Gators, and then some younger guys that we're looking to see some more for. Scooby Williams, Derek Wingo. We'll see where Mari Burney fits in there. One more year at linebacker. So maybe third's a little too high, but I'm telling you, from everything I can gather, opposing SEC coaches love Ventrell Miller. We could tell his leadership was out there, missed on the field. He may not be the absolute best middle linebacker in the SEC. SEC coaches will put him up there. He's going to represent Florida at SEC Media Days one more time next week. But Ventrell Miller gets a lot of love there for in the middle of Florida, in the middle of that defense. You could tell he was missed last year. That leadership, that ability to stop the run was missed on this Florida defense last year. But third might be a little too high for me.
I'm blown away that they're this high. Just blown away.
Would
Like
you
I
even have
look
him
at,
fifth? Would you even have him fifth as like Athlon?
I can't believe they're not in the 8th or 9th spot
Right.
based on the way everything else has been ranked here. I mean, Ventrell Miller missed all of last year. And the last time we saw him on the field, he's getting torched by Najee Harris in the passing game. Now maybe he's improved considerably, and the leadership, I don't want to underestimate that.
Good point.
Amari Burney has been an average linebacker at best so far. David Reese really hasn't seen the field. DeJuan Black haven't
Right.
seen the field. Derek Wingo hasn't seen the field. Chief Borders Scooby Williams haven't seen the field, and Shamar James, big time recruit, hasn't seen the field yet. And you lose guys like
Hopper
Mahmoud
and Diabate.
Diabate, and then you lose Tyron Hopper, and they have us 5th and 3rd. Like I mean, I guess Cox is included in that, right?
Right,
So
that is part of it. Yep.
that doesn't prove it. But I gotta be honest, some of those counter plays last year were because a defensive end or a defensive end / linebacker was shooting up the field and running right in that gap that was occupied there. The defensive line and the linebackers couldn't stop a counter last year. Until I see them stop a counter, I don't think that you can sit there and have either of these units ranked in the top 5 in the SEC. I just don't think you can. Like if you wanted to have them both 8th, okay, I'd be okay with that. If you wanted to have them like 6th, maybe middle of the pack. But you can't argue that the running backs are 11th because we haven't seen tape, and then go the linebackers with 3rd because the only tape we have is Ventrell Miller from 2 years ago.
Yep. And as you said, I'll keep this running joke going. I'm going to see how good those Utah coaches are. I am running a counter at Mahmoud Diabate until he proves he can stop it. I mean,
hey, against Missouri too.
Yeah, right. When Florida plays Missouri and Tyron Hopper's on the field, we're running counter right at him until he can figure out how he can defend it. So
well, then run a reverse at Tyrone.
And then let's go to defensive back. Jason Marshall, I think we all like. Florida brought in Jalen Kimber. You have Jaden Hill coming off of injury. Trevez Johnson, staff really likes him at that star position. Trading returns. Rashad Torrence gets a lot of love. This is probably one where I would have said, if it was 5th and 3rd, okay, I can see it. You know, and they do have Athlon does have Florida's DBs at 5th there. 7th, I probably a little too low for me there from Lindy's in this Florida defensive back group. I do think there's going to be massive improvement with Patrick Toney on the back end, leading the charge there, making sure the communication, making sure the signals from the sideline are much clearer, much better. Guys are going to know what they're doing. We went back and looked at this defense. It's going to be very important for this defensive back group to read their keys and all that. That's okay. We'll have to see it first, but I do think having your defensive coordinator back there leading the charge does help some. And then let's not forget, Corey Raymond was hired. Lay was one of, if not the best defensive back coach out there. And I think he has a lot of talent to work with. So maybe this is more of okay, you got to prove it. This Florida defense has not been the best the last couple of years, giving up some big plays here. Much better last year than they were in 2020. But after losing Kyer Elam, I think we know what Jason Marshall can possibly be right there, but I think a lot of the SEC probably doesn't see it yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would have had this group way higher. I mean, Florida ranked 3rd in the SEC behind Texas A&M and Georgia in yards per attempt allowed through the air, and they were 18th total in the country. Now, Kyer Elam obviously is in the NFL now, but Kyer Elam was also a late first-round draft pick because Kyer Elam didn't play very well last year for what the expectations were. It's not that he played badly, but he did not, and he was injured, right? And some of that injury, I think, sort of dragged some things down. Florida's defense overall was pretty putrid, but it was awful on the ground, not necessarily through the air. They were able to stop people through the air most of the time. So, did they have some holes? Absolutely. Did they have some issues lining up? Absolutely. But where did you really, if you think about where Florida got torched, it was almost always down the middle. It was almost always sort of, taking advantage of linebackers and safeties. And then I think you've got guys like Torrence and Trevez Johnson who've played a lot now at safety coming in as juniors, a lot of tackles last year, a lot of activity. And now you start thinking about Toney being able to come in and Raymond being able to come in and coach these guys. It's not a coincidence that they bled a couple of guys off from the safety position when they had their cuts at the end of the spring practice. They didn't need those guys. And the reason is they had a ton of depth. And the reason is they got Johnson, Torrance, Kimber, Helm, Marshall, and then you even got guys like Jordan Young and some of the other guys, and then you've got Kamari Wilson and Devin Moore and Miguel Mitchell coming in to supplement it from the safety position. Now, this is something where I look at it and say, on the defensive line, Chris McClellan playing scares me because Chris McClellan may get a ton of snaps. Kamari Wilson and Devin Moore, those are guys where I look at it and say, these guys are going to get some snaps, but they're going to get snaps initially against teams like Eastern Washington and stuff like that. And then towards the end of the year might really be able to be contributors. So look, I believe in Jason Marshall, and that's sort of the start, right? If you've got a lockdown corner that you can start, then it's who do you put on the other side? Okay, well, now we've got a guy like Helm who started to really play well towards the back end of last year. Can he keep that going? You've got a guy like Jadon Hill who had won the job coming out of camp and then hurt himself. Well, can he come back fully? And be 100%? And usually it takes a little bit more than a year to recover from an ACL, so maybe that's still an issue.
And
but
Kimber looked really good in the spring game.
And Perkins showed some stuff last year as well in terms of being a physical guy in the slot. So look, the statistics tell me they were pretty good last year. Obviously, you lose Kyer Elam, and somebody has to step up. But I think the thing is Jason Marshall is fully equipped to be able to do that and showed that he was going to be able to hold his own in the SEC last year, which is kind of what Kyer Elam did his true freshman year as well. Like the questions about Florida and Kyer Elam a couple of years ago when he was a sophomore rotated around that very fact. Now, that 2020 defense, even through the air, was awful. But that wasn't Kyer Elam's fault. That was because of who they had on the other side, and some other things that were going on as well. So I think the funny thing is I don't even point to the addition of the coaches and the better teaching and knowing where to go and all that. So obviously that's good. But I think even if they ran the scheme from last year with these guys, they were still pretty good through the air. And so I would expect it to be the same or maybe even slightly better this year, even with the loss of Elam.
All right, well, let's get to more. There's the unit rankings there for Florida. Not a lot of love, like as I said, for mostly. I'm gonna throw it back up there one time. Mostly bottom half of the SEC, right there on the offense. The best position groups there are going to the linebacker core and the defensive back group there for Florida. So now let's start with Athlon and look at the all SEC here, listed out by just how many they had on each side. Georgia with 11, no surprise there, all SEC players according to Athlon. Tennessee with 7. Florida comes in third with 5th, with 5 players there. Osiris Torrance there was second team. Britton Cox was second team. Dexter, Miller, Marshall, third team there for Athlon. So there's your 5 there. Britton Cox getting second team SEC. As like I said, these publications do like Britton Cox. We do have to see the next step of his game. I think that the numbers there, the sack numbers were there, the pressure numbers were there. Needs to become a more dependable player in the run game. South Carolina, Kentucky, Missouri, Vanderbilt, no surprise there as far as all SEC goes. Will, man, of course, no surprise. Alabama, Jesus, look at 14 players on the all SEC right there. No surprise. Texas A&M, second. Auburn is picked to finish dead last in the SEC in both publications, but Athlon still has them third for all SEC players. So, that makes a little bit of sense. And then I'll go to Lindy's here, and then we'll kind of bring it all back together. No surprise, Georgia at the top of there. South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, Florida, with only 3 from Lindy's. Osiris Torrance gets first team. Dexter Miller get third team. So Lindy's not as friendly to Florida there. Alabama with 13. But, Will, one note I took from this as we look at the SEC just a bit here. Bama, 13 all SEC players, all of them were either first or second team.
It turns out they're pretty good.
Yeah.
So, look, I appreciate Lindy's here having Florida at 3 all SEC players because that's at least consistent with their rankings. The 5 all SEC players that put them at third for Athlon means that there's really no way that Florida's going to finish any less than third in the SEC. Yeah. If they have 5 all SEC level guys, they've got enough talent on that team that they'll blow away South Carolina, Kentucky, Missouri, and Vanderbilt. That's just the reality. If they only have 3, if guys struggle, then I can see them finishing 3rd or 4th in the East. But if they hit 5, they're gonna they may finish 3rd, but they're not going to finish 4th, 5th, or 6th. So at least I think from the standpoint of Lindy's, that kind of matches the rankings they have. Auburn, like you mentioned, everybody seems to like their players, but nobody actually likes the team, which is an interesting dichotomy. But
Bill Lindy's there too with Missouri. 2 more All SEC players in Florida. Now, don't get me wrong, some special teams come into this as well, and I probably at least should have put more detail if there was punters or kickers involved. But either way, Florida doesn't have a punter or kicker listed, so it's fair game.
Yeah, look, I think end of the day, this is all fun and games, but
yeah,
I would be very surprised if South Carolina had 6 All SEC players.
Right. Yep. Agreed. But
who'd they have last year? Did they have anybody last year? I can't even remember.
Yeah, right off the top. There you go. Yes, they probably did, but trying to list them off the top of our head.
Come on, you don't want to Google it? Here, I got you.
No, I could have flipped back into the magazine of who they actually have listed, but I was only worried about Florida here.
Yeah, I'm still not seeing them. I'm flipping through them. I don't see anybody on. I don't see anybody on the first or second team on offense.
So there you go.
Oh, they got one, Jalen Foster, who was AP1 for defensive backs. Oh, and then Cam Smith, who was AP2 at defensive backs.
Okay.
So 2 guys.
Yeah, I think, let's see, I could probably find this pretty quick. All right, here we go. At least at Lindy's. Theirs was easier to find. Okay, that's who we have here. So yeah, Lindy's was one giving South Carolina a lot of love. So if I can quickly put this together, Cam Smith is on there, of course. Zach Pickens, defensive lineman, no surprise, I guess. Josh Vann at wide receiver. I think he was. Was he one of the transfers? I can't remember. They have They have one offensive lineman, one all-purpose player. Linebacker Brad Johnson. So there you go. There's some of the names for him, but if they end this, that's first, second, and third team, by the way.
Yeah, you talking about projections, man. Like at some point when's the last time South Carolina had 6 All SEC players? I would bet it was when Steve Spurrier was there.
I was about to say. The head ball coach was roaming the sidelines for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into it, Will. Big feature here of Florida's probably best overall player right now. A lot of love in both magazines from Osiris Torrence, but especially Lindy's. He is the only All-American Florida has, according to Lindy's. Osiris Torrence features him as a first-team All-American, the best guard in the country, the only Gator on the list as far as an All-American goes. Quickly, though, they do have Anthony Richardson as the 18th best quarterback in the country, Jervon Dexter as the 9th best defensive tackle in the country, Ventrell Miller as the 10th best linebacker in the country. So there's some of your Ventrell Miller love there, Will, but that coming from Lindy's. But they also, here's some more love for Torrence, Will. They list Torrence as the 6th best non-quarterback impact transfer in the country and the best pass blocker in the SEC. So a lot of love coming Osiris Torrence's way. He's recognized by Lindy's there. But, Will, let's go back a couple weeks ago. Huge recognition for Osiris Torrence as he was named Walter Camp preseason first-team All-American. So I'll go back and you'll get his reaction to that. He was on the most recent Twitter Spaces with David Soderquist. Torrence joined David Soderquist and me a couple weeks ago in the Gator Collective Twitter Spaces, and he dives into the honor. And also fellow offensive lineman Kingsley Egwican shares the importance of having Torrence's experience in the group.
It was an honor because I really wasn't expecting it. Then I just seen a notification came on my Twitter, then I had it. Then it just started blowing up. I ain't know nothing about it, and it was just shocking. But it was still an honor to get it though. At the same time, I honestly try not to pay attention to it because I don't like to pay attention to accolades to after the season. But from seeing it, it definitely makes me want to go harder than the fact that Javon's on it too. We both want to get to that practice, and I feel like he's probably one of the best D tackle in this conference, and just from getting reps at him, just builds my confidence towards the season to play against other like SEC opponents and stuff like that, because it's gonna be a difference than what I'm used to. So like, but getting the reps against him and other guys at practice, it's like helps build my confidence every day, and then just that award just kind of helps it a little bit too, like giving more to work forward to, and like keep the drive going.
Is it does it kind of confirm a little bit all the work you've been putting in and leading up to that point?
Yeah, that too. I feel like I'm putting in a lot of work, even like from back at Louisiana. Just I feel like all that work I put in just kind of like paying off a little bit from me getting that, and then I just like feel like it's just giving me another opportunity to show it over here. And I feel like we got a good group over here that I can show it and like do good with.
You still going to try to keep up those 0 sack numbers?
Oh yes, sir. That's the goal.
Yeah, I looked that up the other day and I said, "Wow, that's amazing."
Yeah. I say I had a lot of. I said I wouldn't put it all on me. I had other good linemen around me. Then like just the other good QB at Louisiana, like just kind of helped out too.
Kingsley, what did you gain from Osiris Torrence and those guys playing under a lot of this staff the year before?
I would say Osiris, he helped a lot because he already knew, like when we initially started playing, he already knew everything because like he's been in the offense. So like when we would be on the field, if it'd be something that maybe everybody else is a little foggy on, he might have the answer for it, or he can like help guide it a little bit. So I would say with that was definitely a big help, just getting adjusted to a new offense and a new system.
Well, there we go. One more quote from the Lindy's preview. This come from a Florida staff member. They did not name the staff member, but quote, "He's honestly the most SEC-ready offensive lineman we have. He's just the most complete guy," they said about Osiris Torrence.
Yeah, I mean, he's projected to be a first-round NFL draft pick, right? Like, and he's a guard, so guards are less important than tackles, really, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. But when you think about what Billy Napier wants to do, guards are really, really important. And we just talked about how Florida's defensive line last year with Braun and White and Eggleton were able to push back Alabama's defensive line. And so now you bring in a guy like Torrence, who's really NFL ready. And, if he hadn't have transferred to Florida and he'd gone into the NFL draft, he probably would have been drafted in the second or third round, you figure, last year. Guy who's first team All Sun Belt in 2021, second team All Sun Belt in 2020. But I think in 2019, it's important to note that he was a freshman All-American. One of the things you'll note is if you look at guys who make freshman All-American, those are guys who tend to make All-Conference and All-American later on because they just sort of show that talent early on. And that's the thing, is this isn't like Osiris Torrence is a late bloomer. It's that he was identified by Napier and their staff, brought him in, and he was good right away. And so, he was part of those lines. And in 2020 and 2021, were Joe Moore Award semifinalists, which are, is an award for the line, the broader line. A bunch of guys from those lines went to the NFL. And I think if you ask Napier, he might say that Torrence is the best one he's had. And so, they've had some really good offensive linemen there. And these have been 3-star guys who've come in. So I know we talk about recruiting all the time, but offensive line's a tough place to evaluate and evaluate well when you're looking at it, right? You can see a road grader, but how does he pass block? Maybe you catch a guy on a good day and you give him the can't miss guys are guys you see and you go, okay, yeah, they can't miss. But once you start getting down into the 3, the 4, the 500s, I think there's probably a lot more differentiation between those guys. And it's kind of hard to see which ones are better. So again, Napier IDs him, comes in, he's great as a true freshman. And then, all of a sudden he's been great as a junior, great as a senior, or great as a sophomore, great as a junior. I don't know why we wouldn't think he'd be great as a senior. And given the unit he's coming into and the success they had on the ground last year, I suspect he's going to get a lot of pub, especially if Florida's run game is as effective as it was last year.
Yeah, excited to definitely have him, and him on that Twitter Spaces a couple weeks ago. And if you want to listen to the whole thing, it was one of our first chances we really got to dive in there with Osiris Torrence. It's on the Gator Collective site there. So, Will, before we wrap it up, I wanted to go one more thing, and I caught this going back over the magazine right before we went live here, and it's called Class Warfare, and it's who can win a national championship. And they say everybody falls into one of these 5 classifications. And this is coming from Lindy's here. So they call Class A actually part of the conversation. And we know the teams here: Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State. So now they're bringing in everything: name, image, and likeness, conference realignment, TV deals, bowl games, NFL draft, all that stuff. So this goes into what programs can win the national championship. So Class A, they labeled that actually part of the conversation. Class B, trying to get back into the conversation. Florida State, LSU, Miami, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Penn State, Texas, USC. Think no surprise for Florida to be among that group.
Who's Florida State? I don't know who that is.
Yeah, they might be a little too soon on that one. Because if you go and look at Class C, Auburn, Michigan, who just made a college football playoff, Michigan State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Washington, Oregon, Wisconsin. That's Class C, who they think they should be part of the conversation. So I don't know the distinction between trying to get back into the conversation. I guess that's teams who have actually won titles within, somewhat recent history, 15, 20 years or so. But Penn State.
Where's Nebraska? Frost lost like 37 games by one score last year. He should be much better with
So here we go. I'll just keep going, and then we'll come back to Florida there. Class D is on the rise, on the edge of the conversation. Cincinnati, Houston. Everybody else in the SEC except Vanderbilt.
I was going to say if they put Central Florida in there in that category, I'm just logging out.
Class E would like to someday be part of the conversation. Everybody else in Power 5 conference not listed above. So they're not even listing Group of 5 at all, except for Cincinnati and Houston.
Probably right.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll agree with that. But yeah, so all the classifications, 5 classifications there. Florida is in the trying to get back into the conversation with Florida State, LSU, Miami, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Penn State, Texas, USC.
Yeah, look, I think I think Florida is trying to get back into the conversation, right? Now Florida was in the conversation in 2020, so it hasn't been too long since Florida was in that conversation. And Florida tends to jump up. We talk about recruiting and we criticize it from time to time, or all the time, depending upon who we are. And sometimes that's warranted and sometimes it's not. I think it's easy to forget that in 2012, Florida was really, really close to playing for a title. Yep. In 2015 and 2016, Florida was in the SEC championship game. In 2019, they went 11-2, and had they been able to take out Georgia, would have been in the SEC championship game. Now, obviously, they lose to Georgia. 2020, they beat Georgia, and they end up in the SEC championship game. The hiccup against LSU is a problem, but still, that was I don't think Florida had much of a shot to win that SEC championship game, but it was a good game. Like, they were able to make Alabama sweat a little bit. So recent history for Florida is that they can jump up and be a competitor in the conference. I don't think anybody's questioning that. And if you're a competitor in the SEC, you have a shot at making it to the playoff, which, look, Ohio State had a little bit of a down year last year. Michigan had a little bit of an up year last year. Michigan got Ohio State, and that's how they got into the playoff. And then we saw what happens to a team like Michigan when they get in the playoff against one of the big boys in the SEC. That's your problem, right? The problem right there is if Florida was in the Big Ten, I think we'd pick them top 3 in the conference and say, Ohio State's probably going to beat them. But, do they have a chance to beat Michigan? Absolutely. Do they have a chance to beat Wisconsin? I think they'd be favored. Michigan State, I think they'd be favored. Florida, I think would be favored against everybody except for potentially Ohio State and Michigan next year, maybe Penn State if they were in the Big Ten, right? But now you start asking, who would Florida be favored against in the SEC? Georgia, no. Alabama, no. A&M, no. Arkansas, close. I would, but I don't know that everybody else would.
Florida was playing Arkansas week 1. Arkansas would be favored.
Yeah. And so again, now you're going down the East as well. And it looks like people are picking South Carolina. People are picking Kentucky with Levis and Rattler. People are picking Tennessee. And so, I think the question marks in the SEC are different than the Big Ten. So yeah, look, it's going to take some time for Florida to get back to where they're a consistent player there, certainly given what we've seen on the recruiting trail recently. But the idea that they can't jump up into that conversation, or that they can't take that jump the same way Michigan did last year, I think is false, right? I think Florida has a great opportunity to make the playoff under Billy Napier, not this year probably, but in the next 2, 3, 4 years, I think they have a great opportunity to do it. The question when we harp on recruiting is, do they have an opportunity to do it every year? And, Alabama right now, everyone expects them to make the playoffs. They pick them to make the playoffs. Georgia, everyone expects them to be there. They pick them to make the playoff if they don't get knocked out by Alabama, right? And so that's where Florida wants to be. And so the building aspect of it is, that Florida's had a few up years and some down years and hasn't made the playoff yet. But I think they've been pretty close, as opposed to some of those other teams that were on that bill. Like Florida State hasn't sniffed a playoff in a decade. And, ever since Jimbo Fisher left, what was that, 2013, that they won the championship with Winston? And then did they lose to Oregon the next year in 14?
In the first round of the playoff? Yeah.
In the first round of the playoff. Like they haven't sniffed it since then. So, the idea that they're in the same category as Florida, I think is a little bit insulting to Florida. But again, it depends on how you define those classes, I suppose.
Yeah. Like I said, Penn State, hasn't won a national championship in forever. They're in that list. Texas has fallen on harder times than Florida has. They're on that list. USC, recent history, fallen harder than Florida has. LSU, right on par with Florida, but has beaten them on the field the last couple of years. Recent national championship. And then, Miami trying to get back there with Cristobal is kind of in the same shape as Florida as far as, what they're looking at this year. And coming up in the coming years. So, yeah, I just thought that was very interesting. I came across it. I was giving that magazine one last glance before the episode. So, just want to get your thoughts on that, Will. But, yeah, here we go, man. Hey, we got that one right in an hour. So, good job. Good job.
I paid attention when you told me to shut up. That's the key.
All right, Will, what you got coming up at Reading Reaction, man?
Yeah, I was working on that Stetson Bennett article. I never got it done. So that's what's coming up this week is a real trying to take an analytical look at Stetson Bennett, trying to look at it and say, hey, should we fear him? Where Richardson is ranked, right? I mean, does that make sense in terms of where he's ranked? We've got Richardson ranked. He's below Bennett. Does that make sense? Does he have another gear? Can he turn it up? Is he going to be able to lead Georgia to another championship or at least another win over Florida, given the fact that they lost an awful lot on defense last year? Basically, was the championship a product of the defense, or does Stetson Bennett have another step up? And, look, I think it's good to take a look at the rivals, understand where they are. And this is the one that Florida's trying to overcome. So want to get a look at that so people know what to expect, because the reality is I think we all sort of look at Stetson Bennett, especially like halfway through last year, and sort of scoffed. And then, you look at his stats at the end of the year, they're really good. So the question is that a product of the system and a product of the help that he gets from the defense, or is it that he really does have that ability and, that we ought to respect him maybe more as a fan base? So that's what we'll be looking into, and hopefully people enjoy that.
Well, yeah, it'll be hometown of Blackshear, Georgia in Atlanta next Wednesday. Stetson Bennett and myself will be up in Atlanta next Wednesday. So
we have to ask, is there something specific about Blackshear, Georgia that, that like when you were growing up there that, you would both have in common? Is there like an arcade or something? No,
I'm much older. So no. Yeah. And
I was gonna say, is there anything in Blackshear, Georgia that is of note?
Nope, just a high school. Blackshear is really small, so everybody out there, if you've driven through Pierce County, Blackshear, it's there's not much there. So, but that'd be kind of cool. So Wednesday it's the media days. Florida is there the same day as Georgia for Wednesday, and Florida announced Anthony Richardson, Richard Garage, and Ventrell Miller. So I was surprised Ventrell Miller got the pick 2 years in a row. So, but he is the leader on that defense. So. It'll be fun.
Yeah, makes sense. Does Stetson Bennett have your accent?
I believe.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Are you going to get an opportunity to ask him any questions about Blackshear?
I do hope so, because I do want to throw the Blackshear angle at him a little bit. Here's a gator, here's a dog from Blackshear. So I know the locals will get a kick out of it if we can get something done there. So
that's great. I joke, but that is pretty cool. Right, to have a guy who's a big-time college football quarterback coming off of a championship to be able to say he's from your hometown. Now, obviously, he's for the rival,
right?
Which means you should give him some crap that he didn't come down to Florida. But beyond that, that'll be cool.
Yeah, but it'll be a fun time next week there in Atlanta. So that'll be next week. SEC Media Day coverage like crazy from Atlanta. So it'd be a normal episode I put together with all kind of video and sound bites from Coach Napier and the players. It'd be Napier's first SEC Media Day, so that'd be cool. And we do get to hear from the quarterback, so that's always a good time as well. And then I'll do another episode next Friday when we get the SEC predicted order of finish. So that'll be on the docket next week for SEC Media Day. So, all right, Will, anything else, man?
Nah, just really appreciate everybody supporting us with the magazine. It's been awesome to see everybody's response, and really appreciate everybody supporting us out there.
Sounds good. You can find Will at readandreaction.com and on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. I am the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.